everybody. It is the Dark Conservatarian, and I'm here with Strike Force, and another episode of Strike Force. Strike Force interviews, more in particular, here with a guest that I have had once before about a different issue, but now we're on the subject of economics, and his name would be Taylor, the Cultural Boomerist. Say hi, Taylor.
What's up, y'all?
All right, so what kind of prompted the idea of this stream? Honestly, I cannot remember that fondly of what kind of prompted it at first. Oh, yeah, actually, now I remember. It was an argument that Taylor was having with S-Man over Twitter on economics, and I offered to moderate a debate between the two of them, but instead, Taylor wanted to go, was more lenient for a one-on-one stream with me, a more interview-ish than a full-on balls-to-the-wall debate stream that he'd be having with S-Man. So it's neither here nor there on that front. And also, there was the fact that in our last stream together, Taylor had mentioned something about economics and I think the private sector and private property just in general. And I was all like, well, I disagree with you, but we'll save that subject for another time because we are like currently talking about race and other issues. And so, yeah, we've been holding that issue kind of in limbo for a while. And come to think about it, honestly, you have like never debated somebody like full on, be it whether the stream was primarily about it or it was just a short little spat. You had never argued with anybody about economics before, have you, Taylor?
No,
on live stream more particularly.
I'm not a skilled debater. That's why. And also, there's a lot of things about. There's a lot of specifics about economics in the United States that I don't quite fully understand, particularly, all the numbers and shit. I more so look at economics from a, sociological perspective and how it impacts society versus all the intricate numbers and all that. So there's a lot of reasons why I don't debate people on it because I do it. Someone would have to be on my level. Like they have to know a lot of the things that I know in order for me to argue with them about it. But they also would have to. Also, there's just a lot of things that I don't fully understand about, particularly neoliberalism, because it's it's kind of a fucked up ideology in my opinion that makes debate kind of difficult. I have friends who are better at debating the intricacies of economics than I am.
And by the way, Brandon has entered the chat. Hello, Brandon. And as far as like other commies, don't mind me like using that nickname, commies. By the way, as far as like any other commies that you think would be more qualified to debate on economics, shoot their profiles my way then, and maybe I'll consider like approaching one of them or something if I have like no interviews lined up or anything like that.
I'll have to find that out. I'll have to figure out who specifically I know who's good on that subject. Because most of my
Todd the Smaller, Charlie Green. Todd the Smaller or Charlie Green.
I'm not sure about them. They might be able to argue. But I know that most of my comrades are very history based. They're like me. They're history nerds. So I'm not sure what they know on these subjects.
Oh shit! I did. Oh fucking shit!
What's up?
Testing 1 2 3. Does it sound better?
Oh wow, you sound a hell of a lot better.
My bad, everybody. I forgot to double check my settings right there to make sure that it was like being taken through my stick mic instead of my webcam mic. I don't know why the fuck that it keeps on wanting to revert back to my webcam every single time that I come up with a new live stream, like just by default for some reason. But apparently that's a thing, and it's something that I need to like remember to double check every single time I go on a StreamYard stream. It wasn't an issue with Google Hangouts, but here we are. But anyway,
I would also say that not all of my comrades agree with me on economics. Like, for example, Charlie has a very, very different view on Marxism than I do. And so it leads to him and I butting heads a lot. Uh, Todd sort of agrees with me for the most part, but he's much more libertarian than I am.
Mm. All right. So you mentioned neoliberalism. Well, actually, I want to make a one quick comment. I mean, you have like debated other people before, like you have debated loudmouth reviews, for example, when it came to Israel and Palestine, and
Ugh.
loudmouth reviews.
I did poorly when I argued with him about that. I
Yeah,
didn't
and
do
you were
so.
also at the same, like in the same 10-minute segment, debating S-Man and Brandon on race issues. Well, actually, Brandon did not argue a lot, but S-Man chimed in definitely. It was like S-Man and Loudmouth versus you and Geek at one point. And about neoliberalism, I find that term to be kind of a little bit ambiguous, so to speak. That like there's no solid definition that I have seen about it. Like a few times I've seen it be referred to another way of saying capitalism, but
Well,
most of the time when I hear neoliberalism, I hear it defined as basically plutocracy or corporatism rather.
all right. Well, I view plutocracy and corporatism as a part of capitalism. Now, you don't have to agree with me on that. That's just how I view the relation between those two. I view corporatism and plutocracy as the logical conclusion to that ideology. But is a neoliberalism is basically the corporatism, the plutocracy. It is a wholesale rejection of Keynesian economics. It comes from the ideology of Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, the Chicago School, Austrian schools of
Wait,
economics.
Milton Friedman. As far as I know, Milton Friedman was against government subsidies and government bailouts of corporations. That's not
No,
very
no, no,
plutocratic.
no, no, no. So, okay, well, it's neoliberalism has is about mass privatization, the austerity policies, deregulation and free trade, as well as reductions in government spending and an increase of the role in private sector in the economy and society.
Well, like I've said, I've heard it, I've read it defined both ways as another synonym of capitalism and also as a synonym of plutocracy. Like when some people be referring to Hillary Clinton, uh, for example, as a neoliberal. Like Hillary Clinton is not somebody who I would think as the pinnacle definition of a free market capitalist. In
Okay,
fact,
give me
she's
one
like
second.
in
Give me one
bed
second.
with a whole lot of corporations and assisting them, subsidies, bailouts, the like, or at least being in favor of those types of things. Like, yeah, she's fairly pro free trade, I guess. But that's the most free market thing that I can think about her. But aside from that, a lot of it is either um, liberal regulations, kind of slightly left policies on the economy, or just plutocracy slash corporatism.
I would define Hillary Clinton as a neoliberal, but a soft neoliberal. She's not. She's less anti. She's less. Um. She's much less antagonistic to the private sector than I would like her to be, and that's why I don't like her. But she is definitely a corporate candidate. She's
Hmm.
definitely she will her policies would definitely increase free trade. She's very against protectionism, which interestingly enough, and here's the reason why I don't call Trump a neoliberal anymore. Why I don't call Trump a neoliberal anymore is because he's a big protectionist, and that's not a very popular position in the in uh in the U.S. economic sphere anymore. But
Hmm.
people like Hillary Clinton, she's pro free trade to an extent. Um, Her husband, Bill Clinton, reduced government spending, and government. I'm for reducing government spending when it's necessary. Like I don't. I'm against having. I'm against having. I'm against wasteful spending. I'm fine with the government spending money as long as they're not wasting it on shit. And sometimes they be wasting money on shit. And it's like, why would you do that? Like, be efficient. The government doesn't have an infinite supply of money like it thinks it does.
Hmm. By the way, something interesting that was mentioned in the chat. JC Armitage says, "Nah, Hillary supports tariffs too. She's just not as open about it as say Trump." And I said in response to him, "Okay, I'd have to see a source about that about it." So
Let's
but
see.
I'm just gonna like stick a pin in that. For right now, we are going to like give the benefit of the doubt that Hillary Clinton is like relatively pro free trade at least. But so what else I was one to like mention? Let me see. Check my notes here. Oh yeah, plutocracy versus capitalism. Like you say that you think that plutocracy is kind of the logical conclusion of capitalism, supposedly.
Yeah, I think that capitalism enables people who have more money to uh, businesses who can derive greater profit and expand exponentially quicker than other businesses will ultimately take over the economy. That's how they'll
Mm.
eventually form. It will eventually end up with businesses that are just too big to fail.
At first, I
They're,
thought you was going to get to the to saying that some companies are just going to grow so big that they'll be able to buy out the most politicians.
well, they do that too, but that's not really my focus there. Um,
Because that's how I do define plutocracy. But go
okay.
on.
I've you Sorry if you hear all that noise out there, but
Yeah, I hear a fire truck.
yeah, my windows don't have the best soundproofing. Um, but shit, I blinked them. I just blinked. What was your question again?
No, I was just asking you to like essentially continue what you were saying. But what I was what I last said, um, I can't remember now. Oh, what I said earlier just now was that I essentially find the idea of being able to buy out politicians so that those politicians can rig the economic game for you, economically speaking. That is what I would define as plutocracy. Not if like a company was to grow so big through like natural economic means. I don't find that to be plutocratic necessarily.
I
I
might
mean,
be.
if they're to like be able to legally like buy out well, okay.
Oh, I'm confusing plutocracy with oligopoly and oligarchy. That's my bad.
Well, there's some overlap actually because some people would say that America in a lot of ways is an oligarchy with of how that there are like a few rich people that are essentially buying out politicians and they essentially have the strings of government legislation and politics in general across the United States. They have the strings. They're in control of the strings, basically. That's like a very few people. So there is some overlap to be spoken of. But as far as like capitalism being like the logical or plutocracy being the logical definition of capitalism, I mean, one could make an argument that there could be a that it could get to a point that say rich people could like buy out politicians, but that's not if you like put laws in place to like limit how much money like a politician can, or excuse me, a corporate owner could fund a politician or business owner. Say.
I agree that within a liberal society like the one we live in today, it is imperative that we put limits on how much one individual can donate to politicians and the weight of their donations on a politician. I agree with that.
I mean,
Uh,
it's kind of a lesser issue. Well, okay, I at least prioritize that issue more than say legalizing heroin, crack, or meth, but it's still kind of a lower priority issue to me, at least, than say gun rights and personal business rights and abortion, for example.
my oh my God, what the fuck's going on out today? I'm sorry about all that noise.
So, Slavey McSlaverson says, "Peace out, y'all. Make gold money again." I would agree with that. By the way, making returning back to the gold standard.
I have no
Strucker
opinion
has a
on
question.
that.
What?
I
Oh,
have no opinion on the gold standard.
I guess I'll like get asking into your own personal economic beliefs and how you would like your ideal system set up here in a bit. But there's some other chat comment. Ah, yeah, JC Armitage said, "Could you ask cultural boomers to define capitalism?" So, how do you define capitalism?
A system in which it's an economic system in which the means of production is privately owned by individuals or syndicates and corporates. So basically, the means of production aren't controlled by the collective populace or by or aren't controlled by an aristocracy. They are just owned by private individuals. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, well, I would find an aristocracy to be more of a system of government and governance than an economic system. Like, for example, only rich people can vote. For example,
Well,
or
I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm distinguishing when I don't when I say that, when I made my definition of capitalism, I didn't want to blur the lines between capitalism and feudalism because there's a clear difference. That's why I said that
mhm.
there's it's private individuals versus, a higher class.
Yeah.
Any In theory, anybody can join the bourgeoisie class in a capitalist society. It's just unlikely depending on your material conditions.
Yeah, that not everybody is going to become a rich dude. Just want to set that in place. But let me like bring out how I would define capitalism. Basically, I would define capitalism as like private economic interactions. I mean, that's the very without coercion or very little coercion, like some people would when it comes to taxes, for example. Like, I don't think it's a deal breaker if there exists like some very small taxes that, oh, therefore the society is no longer capitalist. uh, Not all ANCAPs are like that, by the way, but I have come across some who will say that if there's even the smallest bit of tax, that the society is automatically not capitalist. But I will agree with them that the idea of taxing somebody, that is not a capitalist thing in of itself. And also, regarding my layman's definition of capitalism being private interactions and private ownership of property and so forth without government coercion, that's me annotating that government is not an inherent thing required for capitalism, which is kind of a thing that, you know, uh, I get into that people kind of disagree with Owen on, like me and S-Man highly disagree with Owen on, so many other people for that matter.
Uh, could you repeat what is it that you disagree with online again? I blanked.
Yeah, the idea of government being an inherent thing of capitalism, when really capitalism is basically free markets. Government is not inherent of capitalism, but free markets are inherent of capitalism. So the more and more government you have intervening in the economy, the less free market it is, and inherently the less capitalist it is.
I don't
Is
understand how he gets where he gets this idea that government is inherent in capitalism. I mean, yeah, I don't believe that there's I don't believe that you can have an anarchist system and be capitalist, but that's because of how, you know, most anarchists define anarchism. But government predates capitalism by
Hmm.
forever. Capitalism's a recent phenomenon of only a few centuries old. And so,
Yeah. Mercantilism was the thing before capitalism. Capitalism wasn't really a thing thought of until Adam Smith. I can't remember if he was like 18th or 19th century philosopher,
he
but
wrote The
yeah.
Wealth of Nations in 1776, so 18th century.
Okay, so yeah, 18th century. There's also an interesting thing that he said about that he said about slavery as well. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you and I can at least agree regarding that part because, well, it's kind of obvious because you do believe in some government. I mean, you are like a fan somewhat of the Soviet Union and Stalin,
Yeah,
as you've said multiple times.
which is one of my main contentions with a lot of American socialists because they don't like the Soviet Union or any socialist country that has ever existed, really. If
Well,
you ask,
Bernie Sanders once praised Venezuela. There's a sound bites that exist for that.
oh, well, that's nicer than what most American socialists will say about Venezuela. I don't know much about Venezuela, so I'm not going to comment on it. But I know more about Cuba and the Soviet Union, and just a teeny tiny bit about China. And so I'm just like, I'm of this position that uh, American socialists should, instead of being terrified of the idea that their ideology will be connected with the Soviet Union, maybe try and learn about the Soviet Union independently of all of the propaganda that they've been taught growing up and come to their own conclusion about the Soviet Union instead of just dismissing it as a boogeyman. And I can tell they're dismissing it as a boogeyman because I can literally pull up information that debunks their statements about like can't think. For example, for example, one of my one of the favorite things that um, left anarchists like to bring up about the Soviet Union was that was the famine of 1932 in the Ukraine and parts of Russia, and they say that Stalin caused that, even though there's no evidence of that. What there is evidence is that there was bad weather conditions in 1932. There was some there was some problems dealing with the landowning class in the Ukraine, and that led to famines. And the areas that had collectivized farms were less hit by the famine than the areas that were still privately owned. And but somehow all these small factors in Soviet politics is somehow Stalin's fault. I don't get it. And
I would. Okay, I don't have my information that straight regarding how much effect that Joseph Stalin had on Russia's famine and whatnot. I mean, I remember my information a little bit better regarding Mao Zedong, and the famine that was more deathly, by the way.
oh, the Great Leap
That happened in
Forward
China.
sucked.
What?
Oh, the Great Leap Forward, that
The
was
Great
Mao
Leap Forward.
policy, sucked. It's now granted not
Yeah,
the
he
whole.
was trying to catch up with the capitalist countries and his ambitions right there. He was being overly ambitious to the point of where that there was a whole lot of death that followed, and that's not including the two revolutions that happened under his watch.
What the two revolutions?
There was at least two revolutions. Like there was the original revolution that kind of resembles Vladimir Lenin's rise of the proletariat. You know, the Bolshevik Revolution.
Oh, the
Um,
Chinese Civil
yeah,
War.
The original one of where that they like basically confiscated private property, from what I remember of it, and then there was a second one of where that Mao feels like that his own communist party betrayed him, so therefore he called up the Red Guard, as he called them, to in mass round up all these traitors and execute them, basically.
I don't know much about the Cultural Revolution, so I can't comment on that. I can't comment on that. I don't know much about it. Oops.
And obviously, I disagree with the first revolution because stealing people's private property, and the second revolution I disagree with because political differences. Yeah, unless like each and every single one of those politicians, those Communist Party leaders that Mao had executed, or quasi Communist Party members, or whatever you want to call them, think of them as, um, unless every single one of those politicians had blood on their hands explicitly, I don't see how their deaths, calling for their deaths was justified, and therefore carrying out their deaths was justified. So therefore, I think that blood is, that unnecessary blood is on Mao's hands regarding
Well,
that.
like I said, I don't know much about the People's Republic of China's history, so I can't really say or rebut that.
Yeah, I kind of find Mao's China to be kind of an under-researched little facet of history, because people focus in so much on Stalin and Hitler, how horrible they were as dictators, and Mao just gets like a back row seat, you know?
Yeah. See, I I try to look more into the Soviet Union because I'm not a Maoist, and I don't really get along with a lot of Maoists because they're assholes. I don't really get along with a lot of Maoists, so I don't really care too much to learn about China right now. I The ideology I subscribe to or am adjacent to is Marxism, Leninism, and so I'm more interested in the histories of the Soviet Union and Cuba. I plan on learning about the Marxist Leninist movements in Africa, like in Burkina Faso and Angola and Ethiopia. I'm curious about how those countries ran. So yeah, that's what I'm more. That's what I know more about.
You know, something I'm kind of curious about, and this is not really important to any point that I have to make or whatnot, but what didn't Stalin essentially kind of betray Lenin's original vision or something? I mean, that's kind of what I thought was kind of implied with the one epic rap battle of history of Stalin versus Rasputin, which that's kind of, I know that it's kind of cringy for me to be mentioning that, but there's some grain of truth to some of those rap battles. But wasn't there something about Stalin betraying Lenin and his original vision?
No, that's what Trotskyists say. That's not really true. Lenin and Stalin agreed on like nearly everything.
Okay. And if
Uh, I will say this. They did butt heads a couple of times, but no, the Soviet Union was at least under Stalin was a fulfillment of what Lenin had been planning.
hmm, yeah, like I said, I cannot remember exactly the exactly how the famine happened, but I do recall that there's recall reading about how there was some uh man, I can't even remember what the policy was called, but there was some policy implemented of where that they were going to give back some private property, some private ownership back to farmers and some miners sectors of the manufacturing industry, give like private ownership back into some people's hands in order to kind of boost up the industry and production and just general improvement of Russia, because right after the Bolshevik Revolution there was like another rising or something like that, where that people were not so agreeing with Vladimir Lenin and the original Bolshevik Revolution.
Oh, you're talking about the new economic policy?
Yeah,
Uh,
that's probably it. And there's something similar that was in China as well, but that I don't think that's important to mention at this very moment.
the new economic policy was in uh, the new economic policy was was definitely a capitalist reform that Lenin had implemented as a temporary measure, considering that their economy was sort of considering that a uh, transitioning from a feudal society that was the Russian Empire to a socialist society that is the Soviet Union is skipping a step in Marxism. So, in order to ease the transition, the Lenin and the Soviet and the Communist Party implemented the new economic policy. And then in 1928, Stalin abolished the new economic policy because it was no longer necessary. And the country formally started transitioning into socialism, which it proclaimed to have achieved in 1936.
Now, doesn't that kind of stomp on the argument of socialism being superior to capitalism? The fact that a big time socialist, or more precisely communist society, needed some capitalism to help its own self out.
Uh, Well, we view socialism not so much as an ideology, but a stage in history and a stage in human development. We believe that capitalism is a necessary step in a society's development towards the ultimate goal of higher stage communism.
Hmm.
In essence, basically, a society that was mostly a feudal state would have to have some sort of capitalist implementation in order to smoothly transition into socialism.
Hmm. And so I guess we'll kind of put a pin in that for right now, and kind of move on with this interview just a little bit.
Hey, give me
Um,
1 second. I gotta use the bathroom real quick. I'm sorry.
all right, so I guess I'll chat with the chat here for a moment. A ghost city is pretty much what it sounds like, a city with almost no one living in them, says JC Armitage. Which famine again, says Night Shift 10,000? I was gone. I don't know exactly what famine it would have been referred to, but we're talking about the Russian famine more precisely. Around the time that I had seen your chat comment pop up, we had already addressed the Chinese famine, of how that was kind of induced by Mao's Great Leap Forward policy. Um, so more like a Fallout Raider. Trying to see if there's like any fun comments in here. 76 was a complete fucking mess, says JC Armitage. I think he's talking about Fallout 76. But yeah, I don't know much about Fallout, so I will take your word for that. But that's generally what I hear about 76. Although I hear that Fallout 4 wasn't that good either, just from the general reviews, anyways. Fallout 3 and New Vegas are considered the best, from what I hear of the general consensus, anyways. Um, uh, Reckless Trucker says Mao also destroyed Chinese heritage for the sake of the Great Leap Forward. Yeah, I do recall that. He also confiscated some farming equipment as well. So not only was he like seizing literal property, but he was also seizing people's privately owned tools, like average citizens at a point. Um, Reckless Trucker says the only part of the Chinese economy that's capitalist is its export economy. What's more, their wealthy class aren't allowed to leave the country with family, says Reckless Trucker. I think he's referring to like the modern day Chinese system. Although I do hear that the economy isn't technically publicly owned in China, at least. It's more owned by privately by the Communist Party members, more specifically. Which
So uh,
okay, you're
China
back.
China's economy today is complicated. Um,
Oh, it definitely is. People confuse it as state capitalism, quote unquote, which I'll kind of say right now is a bit of an oxymoron, or people will call it full out communist or fascist or something like that.
it
Go on.
is it is I like to call it a socialist country with capitalist characteristics because it wants to be socialist, but it has loosened itself out of socialism. And it China's system is complicated, so I just choose not to engage with it. It's
Mm,
certainly not what it's certainly not the system that I would set up. It's certainly not the type of country I would. It's certainly not the type of socialist society that I would aspire to. But it's definitely a left wing country.
hmm. Well, definitely was during Mao's days. But anyway, I guess moving on with the discussion a little bit. So what was your okay? I don't want to make this all about S Man, but what was the argument that you had with S Man all about again, if you can remember?
Something about. I think I don't really remember. It's something to do with.
Well, if you can't remember, I have something else to also bring up.
I think it had to do something with taxing the rich and welfare. I don't know. All I remember is that I ended up telling him. All I remember is I ended up telling him that he hates the poor because that's how he came across to me.
Yeah,
I,
I would obviously disagree with that. I would have to see the context of the tweet, but I'm highly doubtful that anything S Man says is like literally him hating the poor.
I may
Um,
have been I may have been a bit harsh, but sometimes people say things that just signals to me that they have uh, what he said. When we were talking about uh, taxing the rich to help that we should be morally obligated to help the poor or something like that, and that a lot of people's material conditions place them in an unwinnable situation and something. And he said something on the lines of we shouldn't subsidize the failures of others or shouldn't subsidize failures. And that kind of pissed me off because I don't like referring to poor people as failures, especially if they were born in that situation.
I
I
mean,
don't remember all of what we were saying, so I can't comment too much.
say if, for example, somebody was focusing all their money on like investing into luxury items instead of into the essential needs. That I would say is like of their own failing comfortably. Although that, of course, is like a very vague example that I bring up there. We'd have to take it on a case by case basis, but still.
Uh, I would at, one of the things that gets people like me, Marxist Leninists, in the fights with anarchists and libertarian socialists is that we believe that people have to work in order to survive. A functioning society cannot exist if nobody's doing if nobody's contributing to society. So I believe that if you want to be able to, if you want your home, if you want food, you got to do something. Shit, you don't have to, do hard labor or whatever, but have some type of profession. Invest in,
Mm.
consider do something useful that benefits the.
Wait, rewind a bit. Are you saying that this is how that you would like things to be, or are you saying this is how it is right now?
How I would like things to be.
Okay, so that is like a question under what system would you prefer? One second. I'm gonna write this question down for later. Um, but anyway, there was actually I'm going to just be very vague about this example that I bring up, like talking about people not investing properly in their lives. I'm not going to name names, but there's this one person that I know of that he did not have any savings for like if he was to get unemployed. Like when he was employed, he ended up like investing his funds into more luxury items than you know, having an emergency fund for like if he gets unemployed so that he can pay his bills and whatnot. But this person, I still like helped him out a bit, like donated some money to him. I mean, I think what S Man's problem is that we should not be mandated that these types of people get subsidized because ultimately, morally speaking, they are morally and ethically speaking, they aren't that well. Okay, morals are kind of subjective. I mean, it depends on how good a person you think the person is, but ethically speaking, they aren't deserving of that mandated help. But say if, for example, there was a person who like they did not invest in their life properly and you just want to help them out of your own voluntary exchange of things, your voluntary donation, that's completely a-okay. And I would think that S-Man would be the type of person who would think, yeah, go for it.
My position is that okay. I'm very anti luxury stuff. You know, everybody.
I just want to mention very quickly. Reckless Trucker says I like my hard labor, and here as a blue collar American, I sympathize, Trucker. But anyway,
Wait,
go
what?
on, Taylor. What?
Oh, okay. Anywho, I think I think that while I don't believe in luxury and shit. So like I don't think that I think that if the state or society or whatever wants to help subsidize your survival, you shouldn't be buying luxury items. And and I'm speaking on a basis of our present society, because in our present society you don't need to get fucking Gucci shit or or a Ferrari on welfare. Like, excuse you. Now granted, granted
Riley Dennis would give you an ass tune for that.
well, I don't even know
Just
who that is again.
Riley J. Dennis.
uh I
You
don't
know,
think I know that person.
never mind. It was a referential joke. Chat will know who I'm talking about though. But anyway,
But
go
I
on.
but I strongly oppose this. There's this weird growing sect of communists in the Western world who want something called luxury communism, and it makes me want to send them to gulags because this idea that we should create a system of that we should create a so-called socialist system where we all live bourgeois lifestyles is disgusting to me, because bourgeois lifestyles is a lifestyle of excess, and we can't take care of everybody when everybody's has all the when we're supposed to give everybody all the luxury shit are luxury because they're rare and hard to make, hard to distribute. That's
Hmm.
not everybody can eat caviar. The fuck? That's stupid, right? We shouldn't have a society. I think we should create a society where people are taken care of for their needs, not just to have the fanciest of lifestyles.
Hmm. Um, there's like a little chat comment from Reckless Trucker that I written down on WordPad and kind of wanted to mention to you. He says, "Hey Tay, are you aware that letting?" I think he meant to say Lenin, not letting. Hey Tay, are you aware that Lenin had closed down the infamous vodka plants because he felt that it was used to subjugate the poor people? Stalin reopened them for that explicit reason.
I do not know what this is about, so I'll have to learn about that later.
And by the way, Night Shift 10,000 says everyone could eat caviar if they were making all their money and weren't being taxed. Um, I disagree with the idea of caviar consumption just in general. But
Why would
that's
you want to eat fish eggs? This is my crazy.
yeah. I
That's what
mean,
that is.
my thought, yeah, exactly. My thought is that if you're eating fish eggs, that's gonna mean like less seafood that is fully developed into a full grown big bass, you know, for for higher food production, seafood
Yeah,
production more
and
specifically.
and that's the problem. A lot of people claim they want socialism, but at the same time, they want to create a society in which we create an ecological disaster because people want the fancy shit. I'm like, no, you don't get the fancy shit. You get to eat food and eat healthily. That's all you get. You don't need. You can create something nice that is accessible to most, if not all, peoples. But shit, you don't need. Not everybody needs to have lamb chops, you know. Not everyone needs to have all the. No, not everyone needs a fucking Ferrari. Not everyone needs a gold chain or diamonds or whatever. Nah, what people need to do is, not starve to death, not be forced to live on the streets because they can't pay rent, especially in states like California and Washington and Oregon, where they have the worst homelessness problems.
Right. Um. Hello, Trainer McCurry in the chat. Um. Anyway, there was something in the chat that I was kind of responding to very briefly. Yeah, I don't know if the guy is just trolling or and being edgy, or if he's being literal. I mean, I'm more inclined to think that he's trolling, but still just had to pop the question if he was this serious or not.
Oh, what was it?
Um, a bullet for every communist, and I asked the guy if he was serious. I mean, he hasn't responded, so maybe he's not be. But I am going to mention to you right now. I have run across a supposed and cap that unironically said that he unironically believes in systematically killing commies and Muslims.
Well, that's not very non-aggression of him.
Non-aggressive, yeah.
So
um.
so much for the tolerant right.
I try my best at least belief wise. But anyways, hmm. So I guess I'll move on to like another subject. You made a comment at one point on a stream I had heard. Like, there's like so many live streams that happened in middle 2018 that had happened that were hosted by S-Man and many other people for that matter that I hadn't participated in but listened into. And one of them, it was a live stream where you and S-Man and a bunch of other people were on. And you said that you think that there shouldn't exist a private sector, and not throwing shade at S-Man. I mean, I'm sure he has his reasons, but kind of wish that he would have challenged you a little bit more on that. But you say that the private sector should not exist. Really believe that?
Yeah, a Marxist would want the complete abolition of private ownership of the means of production or private property. So I do oppose the private sector wholesale.
Mm-hmm. By the way, True Grave, I wasn't referring to you when I was talking about that example of somebody who literally wanted to kill Muslims and commies. But anyway, so yeah, I guess this is where that you and I disagree with each other. Is that I do believe that private property and private sector is completely legitimate. You aren't like violating on anyone's rights when you go running and owning a business. That's how I would start that off.
Okay. So if a private sector had to exist, for some reason, a private sector. Oh, someone in the chat's calling me authoritarian. I am proudly authoritarian. Anywho, I like but anywho,
I would just
I bel
suggest largely just ignoring the chat because obviously the chat is going to be highly in disagreement with you, and I don't want to make this a big debate of Taylor versus chat.
true. I If a private sector must exist, I believe that it should be owned collect. Like I believe that it should. If a market must exist, then companies should be cooperatives. I don't like the idea of people producing produce. I don't like the.
I'm fine with co-ops as long as they aren't like forcefully mandated. Like if a person wants to go the traditional route of traditional business owning, like say it's just them and maybe their spouse that owns the business, will then and they just got the property and business through legitimate means. Well, then no harm done. I think they should just be with their business. But say if like a group of 12 people, they want to cooperatively set up their own business that they, cooperatively own, all get an equal slice of the profits and ownership of the building and business and whatnot. Well, then, and they do it all voluntarily, by the way, then no harm is done right there as well. I just don't like the idea of mandating that all businesses ought to be that way. Like, hey, Bill Gates, you're not allowed to own your company. You must share it with all your hundreds of thousands of workers equally.
I don't see a problem with forcing him to do that.
Mm,
Personally, I don't see a problem with that. That's that's just my opinion, though.
okay.
Because I don't see a I don't see a legitimacy in someone accumulate. I don't believe that I don't for I don't believe that anybody should ever be a billionaire. Like, how do you like? I don't believe that much wealth should be hoarding that much wealth is ethical in any capacity. So I would force a major company like Microsoft to collectivize for sure. I probably if a revolution happened right now, right? Let's say I was leading a revolution right now, and we took over America. This is hypothetical. I would leave small businesses alone for the time being, probably for a few decades. They would probably be left. The I wouldn't fuck with small businesses or even medium-sized businesses for a long time because I don't need to. But I would go after corporations. They got to go. They either need to be nationalized or they need to be nationalized or fucking uh, what's the word or collectivized. I can't deal with these corporations. They needs to
I
go.
mean,
But hmm?
nationalize is kind of the same thing. It's just through the government.
Well, yeah, I distinguish between nationalizing and collectivizing is because uh, nationalizing is just the state taking control. Collectivizing is the workers just absorbing the company into itself. I I do think there's a difference between the I do think that there's a difference between using state power and collect and the collective power of the people. But I wouldn't fuck with most small businesses for a while, like not for decades even.
I,
It's
I
not. It
do
wouldn't be my primary concern because I don't believe that we can build communism in my lifetime. But I believe that uh, I believe that we should
By the way, I want to mention very quickly before we get too much off of it.
Mhm.
Um, I see no practical difference between like the mob forcefully owning all private property, or the government nationalizing it for themselves. I mean, it's still an equal infringement on private property rights, is my thing. And I want to ask on something that you mentioned earlier. Why is it unethical that, say, somebody owns billions of dollars?
Because as a communist, right? We believe that billionaires didn't earn that. They just they gained that wealth from the workers that they of course they gain this these billions of dollars from the workers they hire. The workers they hire are the ones who produce this who that the workers are the ones who produce the wealth, and the uh, capitalist class, the bourgeoisie, they extract the surplus value of that wealth. I find that unethical, and I find it especially unethical when you have I find it especially unethical when you have you have the rise of billionaires. At the same time, you have their work, most of their workers living and working in terrible conditions. They have very few working rights, especially in third world countries uh, like Cambodia and hell, even China. China, strangely enough, has some terrible working conditions, and I don't like that at all. I think that, but
But by the way, I just want to mention very quickly, uh, I do not condone every single comment that is made in the chat, especially those that are insulting my guests. So just throwing that out there. But certainly, I'm not going to censor. Anyway,
that's fine. Um,
so um, I see nothing unethical with employment. I mean, if nobody was to like if everybody was to refuse working for a business owner, that business owner would have never been able to, never would have grown to be some rich billionaire, and then there would have been no problem. And I see nothing unethical with workers refusing to work for somebody, nor with them agreeing to work for somebody.
I believe that that workers have the illusion of choice when it comes to getting getting a job, especially in poorer areas of the country where where you have very few very few job opportunities, right? In areas where there are very few job opportunities, you don't really have much of a choice on who you work for, and the capitalists know that. They really do know that,
Well,
and so they take advantage of that. Hmm?
it's not of the fault of the business owner that you go voluntary working for.
I don't view it as voluntary. That's the thing. I
Hmm.
don't. What do you gonna do? You either work or you go homeless and starve to death. That's, that's at that point you really don't have a choice. It's just an illusion of choice. It's either live or die. And I mean, sure, some people would probably just choose to die, but like most
Or
people don't.
collect cans and give them to a recycling plant if it comes like to worse, like that area.
That ain't gonna make you no money though. But my
Not
point,
enough, but as far as very basic bitch survivability goes, but or they can like work in that the sweatshop that would be slightly better than homeless at least. But go on.
but it doesn't. But that doesn't really seem like a good life to live, does it?
Not really, and this is kind of why that I find a whole lot of examples regarding voluntary employment, like how some socialists will be just in general will be bashing on the idea of employment. This is where I find it to be kind of hyperbolic. People will say work or die. That's the option for everybody pretty much. Like, it's not like every single person has only one option to go for or else die. One option to go for or else die by natural causes like starvation or weather conditions or whatever. So
Uh,
that's go on,
well,
particularly in the
I
modern era.
I
Western.
pers- I personally believe that that you have to work in order to survive. That's just how it is. I don't believe anybody has a choice in that matter, but I do believe that that workers, because they don't have the choice in that matter, should at least have some level of control. That's why I'm really big pro. I'm very pro union, except for some unions. Some unions really suck, but that's beside the point. I'm pro union in principle because because currently in our current system, that's the only way workers can demand their rights be respected by the capitalists. You know what I mean? You can't a lot of
I think unions are fine just as long as they don't go directly harming on anyone else's rights, including private property rights. Like, say for example, they chain themselves up to a gate or whatever. I'm not so much approving of that, particularly in
desperate
industry that. What? Sorry, go on.
desperate times call for desperate measures sometimes. And that seems like a very desperate measure.
Desperate measure for what exactly? Not I'm not getting being given my $15 minimum wage.
Uh, uh, Not necessarily the whole $15 minimum wage. It could be whatever. It could be whatever is going on in that particular company at the time. I don't. You would have to set up a scenario for me to respond to.
Well, say for example, okay, if you want to like point out, say, some third world country to where if workers are like literally forced at gunpoint to work XYZ job, well then yeah, I can agree with like the idea of excuse me, I'll agree with the idea of having to chain themselves up against the gate or chaining up the gate just in general and welding the chains together so that it won't be so easy to open up. But at the same time, I would question as to whether or not that society is really capitalist or not. But say for here in the United States, for example, I don't see any common example anyways as to why that people have to like infringe upon people's private property rights.
Let's say a company. I have a question. What's your opinion? Should companies outsource their should companies outsource their labor to the third world just because it's cheaper and they can extract more wealth from that, more profit that way? Should companies be allowed to do that?
Okay, when you say allow, that makes it a different context because I was about to change up the question a bit there. But do I think they should be allowed to? Ultimately, yes, but what I would advocate more on top of that is abolishing the minimum wage. I mean, that might sound like a bit of a hot take to you in particular, but
Ooh, very hot take.
I don't believe that next week or next month or next year people in mass are going to start working below 7.25 an hour, like if it was like if we, I don't know, lived in Mexico or something where they just as a very arbitrary example. I mean, there was a Pew Research study talking about how around 90% of low skill workers pretty much make above minimum wage. So that makes me very skeptical that if we were to like abolish minimum wage, that they would suddenly do that en masse. Yes, there would be some forms of labor that would be paid below 725, but at the same time, that kind of flexibility in business practices prevents them from outsourcing their jobs.
I I oppose abolishing the minimum wage for obvious reasons. I don't. Okay,
Right.
I don't really value as you can tell, I don't particularly value the rights of the capitalist class. I think that um, I think that outsourcing is damage. I think that outsourcing and there's two things that corporations really do. There's two things that corporations do that is really harmful to the working class of the United States. One is outsourcing because they eliminate jobs that way, and at least eliminate jobs here. That's one thing. The other is relying on the labor, is prioritizing labor from immigrants because they know they can take advantage of immigrants uh, e-
Right.
not pursuing higher wages. You know, a
More
lot of
specifically, illegal immigrants who aren't able to like report the business to the local government, saying, "Hey, this business is not obliging by the law and giving me 725 at least 725 an hour."
yeah,
Otherwise, they end up getting reported to ICE or something.
yeah. I see. This is going to get me canceled, but I'm not super pro immigration. I'm not. I think that it.
Well, you're a black nationalist, so I kind of expected the least bit.
Yeah, I think that it is not. I don't think that it's do. I don't think that is really good for the working class, at least the American working class. As long as we have unemployment or underemployment in this country, I don't think it's valid to just import people, especially since Congress recently passed a law. I don't passed a bill. I don't know if Trump signed it or not, but it would. But this bill cut would get rid of the cap on how many people can apply and be accepted for a certain visa from specific countries, which would lead to an explosion of people coming here from China and India over other countries because they're the ones who have the biggest applicants to that particular visa. And I'm just like, yeah, that's not good for us because ultimately we're just going to watch our wages implode because our wages implode, our job opportunities implode because the corporations prefer to hire foreigners for cheap over hiring us. It's not good. It's just not good for our economy. It's not. It's
Chris Kerr in the chat says 750, Zach. It was raised a couple of years ago. Apparently, the federal minimum wage, according to Chris, was raised by a quarter. So last I heard, it was 725. I don't know. He could be right. Um, something
it's
that
still 729. It's still 725.
mm,
They haven't updated it since 2009.
maybe. I mean, yeah, that's what I said earlier. But actually, you know what? When I last researched about the minimum wage, like when I was making my response video to Progressive Voice on minimum wage and where rights come from, because he thinks that rights literally come from the state. But when I was researching about minimum wage, yeah, last I researched it was still 725. So I I don't know. I don't know of how true that is, Chris. So just right there. Just making that comment there. And you know, regarding the issue of immigration, actually, just very quickly, would you say that immigration is like one of the issues that you are kind of right leaning on, along with guns?
I wouldn't say I'm right leaning on because I do not like ICE. I don't like I do not like immigration customs enforcement. I
Neither
don't like
does S-Man, really.
I don't like that they one, I hate cops. Like I really hate US law enforcement with a burning
Hmm.
passion. And so seeing how ICE behaves, it just eerily reminds me of how cops behave. And so that's why I don't like ICE. I also don't like the I also don't like Customs and Border Patrol, not necessarily because of their mere existence, but more so because of I don't like how Customs and Border Patrol are handling the current uh, asylum seeker problem that we have today.
Well, obviously, you want some reforms, it seems. But I'm just talking about your principle of what you want to happen regarding immigration, and this kind of goes
Uh,
back to your black nationalism and your belief in a black no state as well. I mean,
I don't actually believe in a black no state
not
anymore.
anymore, at least.
Yeah, though
Okay.
I
Okay.
did recently discover I did recently found out that one of my mutuals is a black fascist, and wow, yeah.
All right. But when it comes to like immigration, you say that you kind of want to restrict it still, have like a slower immigration. And how do you feel about illegal immigrants in general? Do you think that they all should be deported, most half should be deported, or just the criminals? The actual violent criminal illegal immigrants should be deported.
I think that we should that my position on immigration is not solely restricting it, but also prioritizing immigration from the Americas. I don't really care for immigrants from other continents, just immigrants from Latin America and Canada
Mm,
and the Caribbean. Those are the people I prioritize. Uh, and
okay.
because most undocumented immigrants in the United States are from the Americas, I would be I would be lenient with them and incur and give them a pathway towards legal status. But that don't mean giving you a pathway towards legal status don't mean that you can just start committing felonies and shit. I
So,
believe that any undocumented immigrant who commits a felony should be deported. If you
okay.
commit a misdemeanor, which funny enough, crossing the border illegally is a misdemeanor. I don't believe you should be automatically deported for that.
And so, by extension, obviously, those who like violently, emphasis on violently deal drugs. Like, I'm not just talking about somebody who does under the table dealing drugs with literally out hurting anyone. I'm talking about people who violently deal drugs and rape and just go on
Like
murder
gang
sprees for the
members
sake of it. Those
and
people should be
cartels.
deported. What?
Yeah, I get rid of them. I don't want to deal with people who want to hurt others like that.
All right. So I was just um
Oh,
so
another thing is I wouldn't deport children. Um,
okay. Um
and I wouldn't deport families unless someone committed a felony. Then, well, you know then they all got go. But if I also don't believe in splitting the family. If you have and this is kind of contentious because that leads to the whole so-called anchor baby problem. I don't see it as much of an issue because I'm very pro birthright citizenship. It's birthright citizenship is the reason why most Black Americans have citizenship in the United States. But uh, the I don't have a problem with it. I think that we shouldn't split families. We should either we should review it case by case. Like if you came here undocumented and you had kids or whatever, and you are obviously contributing to society, well then we can consider giving you legal status. But if you just but if you are not trying to contribute to society in any way, then you can go, and your kids have a choice on whether they want to go with you or not. Though if your
Okay.
kids are minors, they probably should go with you, and then come, and they have every right to come back when they're
Okay.
an adult.
Sorry, I did not mean to go off on a huge tangent regarding immigration. It's just a quick question that I kind of want to ask. So, you're definitely not far left on immigration to where you want open borders, but you have kind of a centristy kind of position on it, it seems.
Yeah, open borders is something that is so open borders is something that would happen when
All right.
we achieve higher stage communism, and that is so far in the future. I don't even want to think about that.
All right. True Grave in the chat. I got a couple of questions for you, True Grave. Are you like from the Two Plebs Talk News fan base, just out of curiosity? And would you classify yourself as a minarchist, sir? A minarchist libertarian? And True Grave, he also says in the chat, end the welfare state, and you won't have an immigration problem. I'll say at least not as much of an immigration problem, at least, and also ending the drug war and abolishing minimum wage laws. That those will like
The best thing to
those
help
all
with
will like less exacerbate the issue. Sorry, go on.
the best thing to help with immigration is stop for the U.S. government to end the war on drugs, and
Right.
um, to force the U.S. government to stop interfering with elections in Latin America.
Hmm.
Because whenever the United States government interferes, and it's done this for for over 100 years, it's been doing this, where it will interfere with the either elections in Latin America or just whoever's running the governments in Latin America, that can cause a major refugee problem. And that's usually because the U.S. government, the CIA, installs dictators like Augusto Pinochet, for example. You know, all because
Yeah, nobody's gonna be approving of Pinochet, at least on this call, anyways.
the U.S. government removed a democratically elected Marxist, Salvador Allende, and replaced them with fucking Pinochet because, ugh, sorry, it's just it makes me it just made it if we don't want a refugee crisis, then we can't be fucking up other countries. You gotta let them be. Gotta leave them alone.
Um, I was referencing on this the verbal call right here, by the way, Myth Cuttlefish. Um, but anyway, so kind of talking about both immigration. Well, okay, you mentioned something earlier about underemployment.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that underemployment, and the reason why I read True Graves' comment right there regarding the welfare state, is that underemployment, it would be less of an issue. Like some of that underemployment would be resolved if we were to like put the work mandate back in into applying for food stamps. That's kind of something that Obama took out, and so that kind of uh, raised the labor force non-participation rate just slightly. And I'm not talking about old people too. By the way, statistically speaking, I've read up that it was young and definitely younger folk, but even middle-aged folk kind of increased in non-participation during the mid and late parts of his years. But that would like be one thing that would solve the underemployment issue, is if you put the work mandate back in place. I would incentivize them more to like desperately go looking for a job, or at least be consistently applying for a job. Either they be working a job or consistently finding a job, so that they could like get that EBT.
Here's another.
And possibly if they were to like find a job that has been open for months on end because of underemployment, that would like solve that underemployment issue for that job owner that is that business owner that is looking for somebody to fill out that underemployment. And also abolishing minimum wage. That's kind of another thing about underemployment. Some of these jobs, they are like some low paying skill type jobs, like so low paying that even they're kind of put as illegal, so to speak, because of minimum wage. But go
I'd
on.
accept that on two conditions. One, abo- uh, abolishing the lower two tax brackets, meaning people who make under a certain amount don't pay taxes. Or I should say, people who don't. If you make under a certain amount, you don't get taxed on that amount, right? I think we should abolish those tax brackets, and you only get taxed on your first however much at a certain level, and then another thing is what's the other thing?
Wait. So rewind a little bit. You said that you are for putting back in the work mandate if what
Get
was
rid
I
of
trying to say?
lower
If you abolish income taxes of the very, very lowest part of the tax bracket.
Yeah, and another thing is making also phasing out welfare when you get a raise, or you get when you raise when you s- make us when you pass a certain income point, instead of just cutting it off completely. So if you so when you make a certain amount of money, in our current system, when you make a certain amount of money, you get cut off completely you get cut off completely when what's the word when you get cut off completely when you make a certain amount of money. What I propose is cutting it off, is just cutting it slower, like you phases out you uh when you make more money instead. That way people are more incentivized to pursue higher paying jobs.
The chat is kind of starting to get in disagreement with itself regarding the drug war. I mean, I'm for both abolishing the drug war. I mean, if you abolish the drug war, that's going to hurt the bottom line of the drug cartels. Um, it's going to hurt them in that market. Like, as soon as you end the drug war and start decriminalizing marijuana, there's going to be more competitors, and therefore the price of marijuana and so forth is going to drop. Therefore, drug cartels will be making less of a profit. Less money means less power, so to speak, for them. And but even after ending the drug war, and say the drug cartels are still going to continue hurting and killing people and whatnot, when that happens, we go for the drug cartels that might still mildly exist after the drug war is abolished in this rhetorical situation.
I
But
believe
that's my micro opinion regarding that.
I believe in abolishing the drug war and uh and decriminalizing all drugs. Not I believe we should legalize some, but decriminalize all drugs. And by doing so, it crashes the black market economy on it crashes the black market economy because the risk no longer justifies the price, and therefore it hurts the cartels and these gangs in their money.
Mm. Um.
I'll be right back again. I'll be right back. I'm sorry.
All right. So I'm going to asking True Grave if he was a minarchist and if he was from Don's fan base, and he said yes on both. So that's cool. Um. So let's see. And Reckless Trucker is one of those people that prioritizes ending the drug war over. He's one of those people in the chat that is arguing prioritizing more for ending the drug war before we, well, he just puts it as at a higher priority than Myth Cuttlefish apparently is, and just put it that way. Although nobody is making apologisms for the cartel, just FYI on that, Cuttlefish and everyone else in the chat. If anyone in the cartel or otherwise is looking to hurt people, is looking to commit murder, well, then obviously those people should either die by some self-defendee or by the police if they are like around to solve that issue. So, and I made a comment. Both me and Taylor both made a quick couple of comments regarding Pinochet. So I got a question for the chat. Like, overall, how many people in the chat are approving of Pinochet, and how many of you, more specifically, are approving of his killing of communists just for their beliefs, just out of curiosity? I mean,
What did I
obviously,
just walk into?
what?
What did I just walk into?
I don't know. I mean, thanks for the viewership, everybody. But I don't know. It seems that some people, they might possibly be trolling me, but supposedly they're some of them are saying that they are kind of approving of Pinochet. But anybody who has kind of watched my interview with Voltaire, you know who Frederick Voltaire Bastiat is, right?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, everybody who has watched like watched my interview with Voltaire and also watched my highlights clip of S-Man destroying Voltaire on Pinochet kind of knows my position regarding that.
What's your position on Augusto Pinochet?
I mean, from just hearing about his executing of commies just for being commies, I fully disagree with the guy. I mean, he may ultimately, I give the benefit of the doubt that the guy might be a free market capitalist outside of executing people just for their beliefs and censoring them and whatnot. Outside of that, he might have been a free market capitalist, as kind of Voltaire has insinuated to, that he is. But that aside, I kind of feel ashamed that the guy is like a sort of in my economic camp, I guess you could say. He's obviously not in my social libertarian or camp, not in my social camp, but still,
While I disagree with
I highly disagree with
Pinochet
it. What?
killing communists, while I disagree with Pinochet killing communists, I can't expect any different from people like him. But I am a I don't. Here's the thing. I don't think that I would. I don't. I wouldn't kill somebody who supports capitalism just for being a just for supporting capitalism. You. I don't believe we need to do that necessarily. But I do think that people who are a threat to the working class should be punished in some fashion. And so that's my position. That's my position. How vague that is.
Um. Obviously, I say I completely disagree with that because unless they are like actively and directly harming people's rights, particularly the right to life, I don't see why they should be executed.
Oh, I wouldn't necessarily execute them, though. The
I wouldn't
only
even
the
throw
only
them in a
people,
gulag, even
huh?
or jail. I said I wouldn't agree with even throwing them in jail.
The only people who I would persecute for their beliefs are Nazis and people adjacent to Nazis. I,
You, you could make an argument. I don't know. I don't believe in jailing people necessarily if they go advocating for killing people. But at the same time, I feel no. I just in general, this doesn't just apply to Nazis, like literal Nazis who want to kill minorities and gay people, probably as well. Um, but anybody who goes advocating for death, just straight up death for their identity or any other arbitrary reason, um, and somebody like goes punching that person, I cannot fully feel any sympathy. I don't know if I would jail them necessarily, but I don't really think that the people punching those type of people, I don't know if they should be put on assault charges necessarily.
I,
Although, if somebody is like a, this is kind of where I'm probably going to lose you. But if somebody is just a white nationalist or a even a white ethnostatist that doesn't directly advocate for the direct killing of anyone for arbitrary reason, just for deporting them, I mean it's fucked up still. But I don't think that they should be assaulted or anything like that.
well, I would definitely. I don't believe that. I don't believe that people who support genocide deserves rights. And personally, I believe that
All right.
deportating.
Okay.
I personally believe that deportation of a group because of their uh, I, I I believe that deportation of a group simply because of their ethnic identity is genocide, just like murder. You know, the only difference between the deportation and the killing is the is the is that in one instance the people are still alive, but the deportation is still ethnic cleansing and genocide. It's removal it's an attempt at removal and elimination of a group, and so you know.
Yeah, removal is completely different from execution, though. I mean, like, for example, somebody who believes in just outright deportation of all illegal immigrants indiscriminately, not even like differentiating them from the non-violent illegal immigrants and the violent illegal immigrants, but people who just believe in 100% deportation of all illegal immigrants. That's like removal, but I don't think a person should be executed for that belief.
Well, that's very different from wanting to get rid. That's very different from wanting to create an ethno state or an ethno supremacist state where you suppress people because they don't belong to your ethnic group. You know, getting
I
rid of you know we can argue about the ethics of of mass deportation of undocumented immigrants, but it's just not the same as genocide, in my opinion.
excuse me.
So I wouldn't
Um,
persecute someone for having that belief, but I would persecute someone who wants to get rid of all the colored folks from America.
uh, liking the passionate debating and whatnot that's going down in my chat. I kind of wish that I would like get up to 1,000 subscribers or something so that I could like start doing super chats.
Someone appears to want a communist genocide. I don't know what a genocide is. What I do know is that that when I come to power, finally come to power, I will definitely send some of these people to a gulag. A nice gulag, but a gulag nonetheless.
But anyway, the whole reason as to why that I bring up that whole issue about not agreeing with the idea of assaulting people who even believe in something that is almost objectively immoral, like an ethno state, I still don't think that they should be assaulted necessarily because it's giving them a legitimized, an almost legitimized victim mentality, and the also this kind of comes into play the fact that I believe that there is a slightly nuanced like a difference between neo Nazis and alt righters. Like there's barely any difference, but I'm kind of the same opinion that Mr. Dapperton is that he stated. He says alt righters, he hates alt righters, but they just want to deport black and brown people and so forth, whereas neo Nazis full on want to kill them. So based on all that information and the fact that Richard Spencer claims at least that neo Nazis hate him, I kind of give him the benefit of the doubt on that. On it, it's whatever. Based on
He's
all that information, I kind
accurate
of
in my
believe that there is a nuanced difference between neo Nazi and alt righter. But sorry, go on.
I
You're
will
saying?
say you mentioned that you said that that persecuting them would give them a semi legitimate victimhood, victim status, and I would agree. And the only reason that they would have that victim status is because liberals allow that because they're so concerned over cringy ideas like freedom of speech.
No, I would say freedom of speech is not a cringy idea. And also, I would like to say that things like doxing and even threatening to kill, that doesn't apply under my principle of freedom of speech. Like a threat to kill, that's more of a call to action than anything else. But
Yeah, you're right.
anyway, um, tell Taylor I'm black through envelopment, says Reckless Trucker in the chat.
Envelopment. What did some black person did some black person just absorb him or something?
I think he's referring to how he consistently fucks black chicks.
You know, he keeps up with this. I'm gonna ban miscegenation when a revolution happens, or at least
um,
I'll ban heterosexual miscegenation. Excuse me.
Brandon Paget says if a black guy fucks a white person, does that mean they have black in them?
No, if I fuck Brandon, he does not get the N-word pass. Is what he's trying to argue. And but nice try, nice try. But
That's funny.
you know, but shit. What was I gonna say? I forgot what I was gonna say.
Well, I kind of before we leave off this stream, and I think I'll like save the question regarding black Republicans that you tweeted about for maybe some other time because we're kind of running out of time. We're at 1 hour and 36 minutes. So, question: what is your ideal system of communism or whatever have you, and how would that be obtained?
All right. Well, communism is not. Communism is not a goal that I plan on achieving within my lifetime. That is some. You know,
Right.
capitalism didn't come into its whole development. You know, in an overnight. It came into its. It came into existence right in the 1700s, but it wasn't really fully developed until the end of the 1800s and the early 1900s. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the same logic should be applied to socialism and communism. Those state of beings, uh, those status quos won't fully come into their own for even for 100 years. And so I'm not worried about the ultimate goal of communism. I'm more worried. I would like to create a society that where workers have control of the means of production as much as possible. Meaning, even if private industry does exist, private industry cannot exploit the workers by the Marxist conception of exploitation. Uh, and I also think that we should. I think that our governmental system should be radically changed. Uh, I think that our governmental system should be radically changed. Uh, I don't believe in the liberal conception of democracy that that the liberal conception of democracy is weirdly anti-democratic. Like honestly, the founding fathers of the United States weren't big fans of democracy. That's why they formed shit like the Electoral College. Or that's why they form shit like the Electoral College and the United States Senate. Those are very anti-demic. Those are very anti-democratic institutions. I want a I would want a unicameral legislature where it's one national assembly that that is broken into several hundred districts across the country where people can vote in their representatives and that they can recall their representatives whenever they feel that their representatives are doing a shit job. See, in the United
Right.
States, we can't just let's say the people in AOC's district decided we don't like her anymore. They can't just be like, they can't just have a referendum to remove her from power. They would have to hope that Congress, that the House of Representatives removes her from power, which they just want, which almost never happens, right? And and ooh, I just blanked. And what? So I think that any representative should be able to be recalled at any time if they are doing a shit job. I believe that um, we should have a strong judicial system that holds the government to account, kind of like like what I really like the US judicial system, because the US judicial system is the only thing preventing the United States from slipping into a dictatorship, because the judicial system respects the Constitution more than our Congress
You're
does.
talking about this the SCOTUS, of course, right?
Yeah, the Supreme Court, the federal uh,
Because
court
obviously you
system.
don't because obviously you don't like the justice system.
Yeah, I don't like the justice. I
Of
don't like
course,
how.
race and all that. That's a bit of a different issue. We're sticking kind of to economics and what system you prefer, though.
Yeah, well, that ultimately my economic uh wow, it looks like you're the people in the comments don't like democracy very much.
Yeah, they either are no government type people or they are Republicans. Like when I say Republicans, I mean they believe in a Republican form of government, not necessarily the party. Just emphasis on that.
Yeah, I the funny thing about republicanism is that a republic is a republic is such a nebulous term. It literally can apply to any government that isn't a monarchy.
Not necessarily. I mean, this is kind of where I'll disagree with some people that are more democratic when it comes to their favor of systems of government. I mean, a republic has more checks and balances than a democracy. Now, as far I'll say that there's a bit of a spectrum between democracy and republicanism. Like a full on democracy would be just the collective determines purely what goes on in the society, like basically just mob rule. A step up from that would be they just vote in representatives that just straight away legislate on what is to happen. That would be only mild step up. But
Well,
I
I don't.
guess like the most Republican that you could think, the most Republican form of government that you could have is if you only let property owners vote. You have an electoral college. You have multiple different houses of Congress, like we have the House of Representatives and the Senate. And you have like a SCOTUS to keep it all in check. You have a president that can veto legislation in the Congress and so forth. And I'm sure it could get a whole lot more Republican than that as far as systems of government, but that's just, checks and balances. As Pumpkin Row mentions, the government deciding if it agrees with itself or a cat asking itself if it would like to eat that fish. All right, I guess that's an analogy to put it, but
Now,
you were saying, Taylor?
I don't believe in simple mob rule, because I even believe that the majority sucks sometimes, especially in especially on a more local level. Local level, you'll have people with more, you'll have more you're more likely to have people with really shitty views on a smaller scale than on the larger scale. And so I don't necessarily support mob rule. What I support is a more democratic society than what we currently have.
Hmm.
I uh
Yeah,
I
I like
support,
to keep the majority in check. That's why I like republics.
I like I'm gonna I'm gonna sound I like I like the concept of a democratic people's republic, you know, where a it is a dictatorship of the majority, but it isn't an absolute rule of the majority.
Okay.
It should still be a constitutionally binding republic. You know what
By
I
the
mean?
way, yeah, I get somewhat what you're trying to say, but some that I want to address in the chat here, and I think it's going to be a too long of a question to just write it out in the chat. But Miffed Cuttlefish, she asks, she says, Dark Con should have talked to Ham. This is so much better, lol. I think she's referring to the fact that I was like moderating the debate the other day between Night Shift and Cult of Ham, and then it turned into Reckless Trucker versus Cult of Ham. And I got a question on that, Miffed Cuttlefish. Are you saying that the live stream with Ham should have been me and him talking one on one like I am with Taylor right now? Because there is like a stream that I did that with him not too long ago. It's titled Blood Sports, Political Blood Sports with Cult of Ham. It's in my Strike Force playlist. You don't have to scroll a whole lot. You'll be able to find it easily enough if that's what you're looking for.
Did what was the outcome of the debate with Ham? How'd that go?
Okay, so Miff Cuttlefish, I think she was saying yes to my question. How did it go? Well, Cult of Ham ultimately, I would say, embarrassed himself with rage quitting. Ultimately,
Was this about that was about guns, correct?
yes.
What was his position?
Um, he claims to be for allowing gun ownership, but with some heavy restrictions like license, insurance on guns, and I'm not so sure of how he feels about mentally ill people owning guns exactly. But I'm obviously against banning mentally ill people from owning guns because they're more likely to get shot than to shoot.
Yeah,
Um,
like
but
I would love to own a gun one day, but shit, if you ban mentally ill people from gun ownership, my depressed ass will not be able to own one. I
but
think that
yeah.
I am adamantly opposed to gun control. Like it is, I believe it's immoral and anti-communist.
But yeah, but like I was saying, I don't think I'm not for absolute certain if that was what Ham was advocating for, but supposedly he wants people to be able, in some way or another, to own like even fully automatic machine guns, but with heavy licensing, obviously. But
I
he
believe,
argues when it comes to the gun debate, he argues 95% of the time for the gun grabbing crowd more
well,
than the gun rights crowd.
gun grabbing crowd are idiots who think that that our current state is a just society. That they think that our current state is a just society that will act in our best interest, and that's why we should just hand over our guns because they're scared some random depressed white boy's going to gun down the masses. That's just that you know what what gun grabbers need to understand is that there's a way to rectify our gun violence issue without violating the rights of the people. And it and yes and yes gun ownership is a right, because how else do we protect ourselves from the state, you know?
Yeah, I mean that's what I was saying to Cold of Ham the other about a month ago or so when I was like interviewing slash debating him one on one a few episodes of Strike Force ago. This is arguing that the common folk they need their guns for self defense against both the common criminal and the government. Whether or not they're actually going to win or not, that's almost pointless. Like, I personally would rather go down fighting than just roll over and let myself get arrested just for, say, get arrested just because I don't want my house taken away or something.
I love when liberals are like, "Oh, but the government they have tanks and shit. They have planes and you know bombs and shit." I'm like, "Well, The U.S. Armed Forces was defeated by a bunch of rice farmers in the '60s. So anything's possible if you care enough. You know.
Gun grabbers hate half our politicians, yet trust them all. Would trust them with all the guns, says Reckless Trucker. It is a bit of irony in that case right there. Okay, so I guess to kind of rewind the interview back to talking about your ideal system, you said earlier that you would mandate that people do work.
Yeah, you can't have a functioning society when everybody's just sitting home chilling. I love. Okay, this is so one of the big one major contention between myself and anarchists, anarcho communists and anarcho syndicalists and those peoples, as well as
Libertarian
libertarian
socialists.
socialists.
Yeah.
You know, one of my big contentions with them is there are literal people who think, oh, you shouldn't have to work under socialism, and I'm just like, what? How do you how can you how can you how can everybody not be obligated to work but then expect you to be able to eat food, have a functioning society? Communism isn't
Yeah.
going to be just some giant drug induced orgy, which is what some of these motherfuckers want.
That's funny. But I would kind of say in response to that, well, you say that you want to like legally obligate that people work.
hmm I believe
Like
that.
if they don't work, they what, get their benefits taken away or get fined, get thrown in jail or something or what?
I believe that if you are of able body and or abled mind, you should find a job of some sort of occupation, in order to contribute to society. Yeah, I don't care what it is, as long as you know, as long as it's a job, and it helps people and helps society. Great, do a job. But what I don't, but if you,
But
but
what
if
should
you,
the punishment be if they
not
don't?
getting your shit, why should we let you, go to the doctors for free if you not gonna work, right? Like, if you're just gonna be a lazy ass, why should society subsidize your trip to the doctors, your trip to the surgeons, right?
Yeah, and it seems that Reckless Trucker he kind of summed it up for you, read your mind, said work for their welfare essentially.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I kind of think that this is an issue as far as like lazy people goes. This is kind of where capitalism kind of works and comes into play. Like you go mentioning the whole thing of work or die.
Mhm.
It seems that's what you're advocating for right there. That's kind of a form of work or die, except everything is collectively and forcefully owned. Well, forcefully owned by the collective, anyways. As far as capitalism goes, it's, well, pretty much to put it bluntly, work or die, quote unquote. Just it's more voluntary as to how it happens.
I believe that people should have. Uh, I think that getting a job shouldn't be so difficult for people of different. I'll put it this way: people shouldn't have to get a specific job just because they have to get a job, right? And that is a problem uh, in a lot of poorer areas in the United States. There, people shouldn't have to work at the local coal mine or the local factory, just because that's the only jobs available in their area. I think that in a socialist society we can create. I'm also a big. I'm also big on urbanization. I believe that people should live in urban or suburban environments and not just all the way out in the country unless they're farmers. So because of that, I think that living in a more urban based society, um, I think being in a more urban society, um, you have more jobs available to you, more occupations. The more you can pursue your dreams better in a society where it in a I think that you can pursue your dreams and goals in a social society better, especially if you're creative like me. I'm a film major. I want to make movies and whatnot.
Hmm.
In a capitalist society, I can't make the movies I want unless the pitch is considered profitable to these major corporations. And I don't know if you've been paying attention to Hollywood lately, but they've not been doing so great with their movies.
Yeah, I mean, hmm.
All of their movies are just remakes and reboots, which indicates a fundamental lack
Well,
of
that's at least the mainstream, anyways. And it's particularly on Disney's part. I mean, there's this one movie called Ad Astra that has been recently released. I'd be interested in checking that out.
yeah, and I'm planning on doing some research on Soviet cinema, but Soviet cinema there was a lot more creative freedom than it is here because here your how much what movies you can make can be based on is solely based on profit motive and not based on you know uh, your creativity, your not based on the actual storytelling itself. It's very low risk. The film industry in the United States is extremely low risk. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, the films weren't made to turn a profit. They were made to for people to experience art and whatnot.
I mean,
Experience
okay,
that art form.
couple of things. Like, first of all, I don't find the fact that there are so many remakes and whatnot being made in the film industry within capitalism. That's practically a non-issue, and I don't find it to be a huge down. Even if it's like true that capitalism is like kind of the incentivizational reason as to why that people are just doing rehashes, low quality rehashes of former properties. Even if I was to like give that the benefit of the doubt, um, I find that not to be a huge downer on capitalism. I mean, it's just going into the luxury areas,
I think
and
it's a
secondly,
degeneration. I think it's a
and
degeneration of our culture.
okay, I would somewhat agree with that. I mean, it's more generational than anything. And secondly, I would ask how many movies and medias was made in the Soviet Union.
Shoot, a lot of movies. I'm not sure this number of movies that were made in the Soviet Union, but they had a big film industry.
Because I would kind of say that Hollywood uh, has like produced a whole lot more movies, like original properties, even than really most other nations combined. As far on the surface, it seems that way. Canada and Australia, they have their own series and movies that do pretty well as well. I mean,
I
uh,
think I think I'm a big okay. I think my position is my anti-capitalism when it comes to arts and entertainment is that I'm a big arts for art's sake type person. I think that movies and music and art should be made because they're art, not just to turn a profit, right? And because of these big corporations that have turned Hollywood and television into an oligopoly, it's harder and harder to make original and unique and creative material today than it was decades ago. you know,
hmm,
one thing I liked about what I like about older Hollywood, with back
80s
when
and
there was
30s.
yeah the 30s and 40s, back when there
Well, I
was
said 80s as well.
Yeah, even the 80s too, but like back before we've transitioned to this monster of a corporate economy that we're in today, films were more film the film industry took greater risks. They made films for art's sake. They these films were artists were art. Now what we have is garbage, and we live in a degenerated culture with
Well, you're a fucking degenerate yourself. What the fuck are you talking about?
it is a degenerate culture. We our culture.
I'm joshing you. I hope you know what you're talking about. Know what I'm talking about there. By the way,
Oh well, yes, but it is the fuck. It is a but yeah, I consider our mass culture to be highly degenerated as a result of our corporate economy today.
hmm.
I hope I'm making sense. I feel like I'm not making as much sense as I would normally make.
No, it's all right. I'm getting kind of more and more burnt out on this stream, and we have just recently hit the 2 hour mark, like 1 minute ago exactly.
Okay,
So I'm thinking of wrapping up here soon. Um, so
they being
I
noisy.
guess I have like one final question as far as your ideal communist society goes. Like, how would it be maintained? Like, I'm probably not going to get into much challenging of this because, like I said, we're coming to the tail end of the stream right here, and I just mostly want to know what exactly Taylor's beliefs are regarding this. But how would it be maintained? Like, would there be a police force that if, say, somebody, for example, was starting up their own business and started hiring people and they were getting richer and richer without, like, giving an exact equal or relatively equal share of ownership of the business to their employees, that the police should come in and seize that private property and give it to the collective or whatever?
Uh, how I would maintain it? There would be a there would be an enforcement arm, yes, like there would be law enforcement. But if someone opened up a business, we're not going to be like, oh, you're going to go to jail for the rest of your life for starting a business. But we would, but we, at least um, earlier, in the, um, in the earlier days of a socialist society, we would put a lot of economic pressure on the business to collectivize. You know what I mean? To We would pass policies that would incentivize collectivization instead of being privately owned. Or if it must be privately owned, it must be family uh, run and family hired. Like in Cuba, a lot of restaurants are privately owned, but they're owned exclusively within a family. And
Yeah, I've read up recently that Cuba has only just recently, very, very mildly, started letting people have some form of private property, but in that small extent, like you mentioned there.
yeah,
But
they
as far as I'm concerned, they're still largely nationalized with a good portion of their economy. So I would definitely not call it capitalist, not even close.
yeah. What Cuba's doing is recognizing that there has been private businesses going on since since the revolution. Private business has been going on, so they're recognizing that it is something that exists, and they're trying to rectify that. Uh, they're trying to rectify the issue of private industry in Cuba. Like I really like Cuba. I would love to move there one day. Honestly, love to live
Smoke a
there.
big old fat Cuban cigar.
Yeah, one of the most. It's a beautiful country. Uh, I've done a bit of research on how their government works. It's it's pretty democratic. The Communist Party of Cuba is much more hands off today than it was in the 60s and 70s. Um, they actually have like several political parties that are in the National Assembly. But I would love to live there. Uh, it's also one of the most pro LGBT countries in Latin America. So, yeah,
I don't know.
love to live there.
Well, like I said, this is more of an interview than anything else. I mean, okay, but wrapping up on the stream, I do think that I kind of challenged you somewhat on your beliefs. Definitely more than Dave Rubin does with his guests. Would you agree?
Yes, sir. And I probably could have done
A little bit more challenging.
no, I probably could have been a little bit better prepared. I had just finished the homework assignment before I logged on, so yeah. But
Yeah, all right.
the chat's hilarious to me right now.
Yeah, at least you're not Cold of Ham, because my fan base loves Cult of Ham. Excuse me as I choke on that bullshit. But yeah, you definitely got more of a tolerable personality than Ham does, just in all blunt honesty. But yeah, it was definitely a good chat, Taylor. And to like, as far as the chat goes, I'm just going to say right now that whether or not people are being sarcastic or not, I do not condone all of the Pinochet comments and whatnot, except for those that go condemning Pinochet, like Reckless Trucker was condemning Pinochet and his actions. So yeah. I condone his condemnation of Pinochet. But yeah. So that's that. But anything that you gotta say before we head out, Taylor?
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Would love to come on for another show for any other and for any other topic, honestly.
Yeah, I cannot think of anything off the top of my head at this very moment. I mean, we talked largely about race issues last live stream, and I need to like make a highlights clip of that live stream, because I feel like that we were all over the place with that particular live stream. I
can't remember what I said in that.
Yeah, they're talking about rock music and other stuff like that. But anyway. So to all of you in the chat right now, thank you for participating nonetheless, despite whether or not I agree with everything that you said. I love the activity that I get on my channel, and just, yeah. Again, thank you for being in the chat. And thanks, Taylor, for joining on this live stream. It was a nice, spirited conversation, even though it wasn't like red hot-headed passion, angry passion, like it can get with Ham.
There are very few things that make me wait that will set me off, and economics is not one of them. I promise you that.
All right.
You could threaten to throw me out of a helicopter. I'd be like, that's nice.
That's nice. And you go to the gulag. But anyway, that's what I say you would say anyways. But anyway, thank you all for participating in the chat. Thank you for coming on, Taylor. And as always, everybody, so next Sunday I will be interviewing somebody from the UK. His name is Cannabil, so stay tuned for that. And I will have like a response video to a Kyle Kalinske fanboy for anyone who is like interested in that, like ripping a secular talk fanboy. But
yo, Kyle Kalinski's a jackass.
Agreed, and a douchebag. But anyway, See y'all later. Good night. God bless. Have a good night.
Have a good night.